welcome to Combat Thoughts. I'm Robbie.
I'm Lee.
And I'm Alex.
We're going to take a deeper look at the culture and philosophy behind martial arts. Take us back to the start. What's your first introduction to it, or maybe what's your first important experience before martial arts in general?
Well, many years ago, me and my dad, we used to watch the World of Sport Wrestling on a Saturday afternoon. We used to be there 4:00 every Saturday. And then afterwards, we'd have a rough and tumble ourselves. My dad didn't wrestle then. He was, it was about 1968. He would have been about 36. And I used to go to school with a lad called Martin Hughes. And he said, "Oh, my dad's a wrestler. He wrestles down the Brighton Boys Club." So it sort of, he said, "We come down and watch him sometime." Well, my dad used to take me to the big Dalmar's promotions. We went to the Metropole and King Alfred. We used to go there quite regularly to see all the big stars, Les Kellett, Mick McManus, Jackie Pallow, all the big stars at the time. So my dad said, I said to my dad, "Well, we've got doing wrestling down at the boys' club." He went, "Boys wrestling? I don't want to go and watch that." I said, "Oh, come on, Dad, my mate's dad's wrestling." So we went down to see it, and the boys' club then, what was it now? It's the old youth club opposite Elements in Edward Street.
Oh, right.
That used to be just the boys' club. The girls' club used to be up Tilbury Place, just a little bit further up. Anyway, we went down to watch him, and my dad got talking to the wrestler afterwards, Sid, and he decided he was going to take it up at sort of 36 at pro wrestling. So he used to go along there. I was about 8 or 9. He used to go along there, do his bit of training, learn how to fall. He did 9 months of just doing break falls. The break falls he was doing are different to the not much different to the break falls we do now, but he's like flat on the back, and where you do the judo roll, they called it the wrestling roll. Anyway, it just moved on from there, and he'd come home after an evening or the next day or the next evening. He'd show me what he'd learned, and we used to do it. And then we started having rough and tumbles. The early rough and tumbles, I always ended up crying. He always hurt me because we didn't know what we were doing. And I'd bash him one as hard as I could because I was Mick McManus or something, and he'd been trying to be, and he'd knock me back. And he didn't do it on purpose, but like, you play with your kids, they always end up crying if you play fight them. Anyway, so I was fine with it, and got no qualms with it. And we just got on, and we started wrestling together, and we was doing it properly as such, and we were just getting on with it. It didn't seem to hurt each other anymore. It just seemed to be better, and he used to throw me across the room, and I used to then throw him across the room, and he'd give me a little bit of help sort of thing, but that was that. We'd always be doing it. So that's when I was about 9.
And just to jump in,
yeah.
So what was the wrestling scene like in the UK at the time? I mean, I'm not very clued up on sort of stuff back from that era about pro wrestling. Was it big? Okay. Did everyone love it at the time, or was it kind of niche?
Well, pro wrestling on the television was everybody. Well, I say everybody. Some people didn't like it. It's like football now. Everybody watches football, but some people don't watch football because they don't like it. But everybody used to watch Saturday afternoon, and the halls used to be all packed out. You're lucky if you got a seat in the hall. In the late 50s, early 60s, the SS Brighton, which is where the Oceanas is now, used to be an ice rink, and that used to be packed out. And they packed it out twice a week. It was so popular. So there's 2 ways. There's the boys' club wrestling started up with a guy called Bert Azarati, and there's a couple of other guys got Bert Azarati to teach them wrestling. Bert Azarati was one of the greatest wrestlers, amateur wrestler, pro wrestler this country has ever had. He goes along the lines with Carl Gulch, Billy Robinson. He was, yeah, he was predecessor Billy Robinson, but he was one of the greatest. He started off as a circus performer, and he could do a backflip holding two 56-pound dumbbells. So that's and he was a super fit man. No one liked wrestling him because they'd always end up getting hurt because he was that good. It was like the likes of me trying to have a pull around with Dom. So like he was that good, and he was feared by a lot of the pro wrestlers. The pro wrestling started off in this country by a guy called they had it early in this country, but it got banned because it got too violent, and a lot of councils and that it was banned in the country. And a guy named Attel Holtley, he reintroduced it with a guy, which was my mate's father, Norman Ansell, who used to wrestle as Norman the Butcher, and he helped introduce pro wrestling back into this country, and then it was in the halls, and obviously it started back on the television in the early 50s. Then my mate Howard, his dad was Norman the Butcher. He's trained at Elements a few times. He is a good catch wrestler. So what happened was they used to all the catch wrestlers used to go to the gym in the daytime, and they used to pull each other apart and pull each other and really go at each other. And then they'd be wrestling that evening, maybe the same opponent, maybe a different opponent. They're all over the country, and they wouldn't go not so hard with each other. They were good wrestlers, don't get me wrong. They could do a good catch match, but they wanted to entertain the crowds as well. So the wrestling became like a freestyle wrestling. So the catch wrestling become freestyle, or like what pro wrestling is now. So where you see the WWE now, that is where it's all stemmed from. And over the years, it's just got more and more and more and more flamboyant. Okay,
Yeah.
so there's guys out but through through my best mates at wrestling, one's Howard, his wrestling name is Lee Bronson. The other one's Mal, his name's Mal Sanders. Another one is Steve Gray. Steve Gray's been the British and world lightweight champion at pro wrestling, and they're three different styles of wrestling. Howard, he can do a good job. He can do a really good job as an amateur wrestler. He was British champion at weight at one time when he was about 17, 18, I think he was British champion. Mao, he did a little bit of amateur wrestling before he started professional wrestling, but he could do a good amateur match if you really wanted him to. And Steve never done any amateur wrestling at all. He just went straight into pro wrestling, and he's one of the greatest pro wrestlers this country's ever produced. There have been some good ones, but he's only recently retired. So that's sort of how the wrestling sort of was introduced into the country. It was just great. It was great sport, great following. People loved it. And if you see some of the old newsreels, you see some of the old ladies there, and they would love it, wanted their front seats.
Just before we crack on, Lee, can you unmute yourself and mute yourself and stuff? All right, cool. Sorry, Barry. Just wanted to jump in because I was hearing an echo across, and it'll make it difficult to edit later on. Lee, just unmute yourself when you want to jump in. Yeah, like I was saying, I find it interesting that it's kind of when people see the American style and see stuff like that, it is quite flamboyant and a bit of a show, but people don't realize it's got those catch backgrounds, and not only has it got the catch like lineage, but a lot of people do legitimate catch wrestling before they get into the professional wrestling as well. And like in Japan especially, I know that's why Billy Robinson went over there and taught like Billy Robinson taught Sakuraba, I believe. That's where he learned all of his original grappling skills.
Possibly, yeah.
I just find it interesting. It's got that whole link with actual martial arts.
Have you read his? Sorry, have you read his
I'm
book?
afraid not. I am reading. I am reading a catch wrestling book, but it's more related to the original history of it and sort of Lancashire catch wrestling at the moment.
Okay,
I've not read Billy Robinson's book.
I've got a copy if you want to
Yeah, I'll definitely
borrow
pick
it.
that up. Um,
Okay, I'll keep that.
so yeah, so I guess pro wrestling at the time was, well, it was big. I mean, I guess people don't realize that there was that big scene back at the time. So it makes people sense,
That's
like,
where I was going to jump in, because a lot of the chats we do with people nowadays, it's kind of, how did you get into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? And it's kind of like the sport of misfits. Like, it's like, you're not great at football, you don't play rugby, so you go into kind of boxing or jiu-jitsu. Whereas this sounds a lot more like you as kind of like the celebrity of the day rather than being the misfit.
But the three guys I just mentioned were household names.
mhm.
They were like movie stars, and wherever they went, they would if people knew them, they were treated like movie stars. And it's I go and see my mate now. He'll probably see a copy of this later on. Mal, I'm still in awe of him now because he was that great big star, and he's a good wrestler. Professional as a professional wrestler, he had most of it. He could do the catch side of it, and he can do the professional side of
Uh,
it.
and what
So
made
he was
someone a great professional wrestler?
what made
Yeah,
someone great.
you say they're the best. Why?
If I'd have known that,
You say they were the
sorry,
best at the time. They were like the certain guys were the best, some of the best catch wrestlers, or sorry, pro wrestlers this country's ever produced. Why do you say they were some of the best?
it's just their whole style. You know what they when a wrestler watches a wrestler, you can see the difference. You can see with jiu-jitsu, you can see someone who knows what they're doing. You know someone who can work the crowd. You know someone so like they'd be doing something, and the crowd would be going mad for it, sort of thing. Now Howard was always Lee Bronson was always like a clean cut wrestler, big guy, clean cut wrestler. Steve Gray always a good clean cut wrestler. But Mal Sanders, he did both sides of it. He done good and he done the bad. Done the blue eye and the heel,
Mm.
or or the face, the baby face they call him now, or the heel. So he could do both and equally as well. But it's I don't know if I'd have known what made them great wrestlers, I probably wouldn't be sitting here now. I would be somewhere off in America, sunning it up. But no, I don't mean that. Yeah, I think they just had it.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'd be
yeah,
interested to know,
I
because
don't
like
know.
a kid who grew up like nerding out on WWF, and like I was kind of into that
Yeah.
world when I was growing up. How scripted was it back in those days? Was it kind of like, how much, like you say, like the baby face and the heel? So like those personas were there, whereas nowadays everything's scripted. Kind of, where did they draw the line?
Um, I tell you, there's a little story that with Billy Robinson, which is I've been told. The Steve, he was wrestling a guy called Steve Viador, and at the time, Steve Viador was I don't know. You say he's the best looking actor at the moment. I don't know. I don't know. Best looking male actor at the moment. He was an Adonis of all the women wanted Steve Viador sort of thing.
Chris Pratt or
And
someone.
he was wrestling Billy Robinson, and what I've heard was Billy Robinson was supposed to win 2-1. That was what the orders were. So, like, although you were told what you've got to, not always told what you've got to do. If the person's not who's wrestling wasn't worthy of what the result should be, you didn't give it to them. You didn't let them have it. But anyway, Billy Robinson was in the ring. Steve Viador came in. He had a rose. He gave it to one of the girls in the audience. Gave her a kiss. Got into the ring, and Billy Robinson went up to the referee. He said, "Tell Steve I'm going over 2-0 now." And it was that sort of thing. He wasn't going to let him win because I really don't, because of his popularity with women, and it's just strange. But you know that he could have just done it anyway. He didn't. You don't, and that's the difference with people say it's fixed or it's that it's not so much fixed that those results throughout the years are worthy of that person. They could have done that easily anyway. Are you with me?
Yeah.
It's like I roll with Dom. I roll with Dom sometimes, and he's super light with me. But like, I know at any minute he can tap me out, and it's that sort of thing. With saying I don't like saying it's fixed because it wasn't fixed as that. Not many matches were
Hmm.
all fixed, but it's a part of the crowd want to see something spectacular, and you'll give your opponent a little bit, and he'll give you a little bit back. So he'll make you look good, and you'll make them look good, sort of thing. So that's where the fixing is. It's a tough old job in there. I mean, it's just as exhausting and tiring and consuming with energy as rolling for 5 minutes. And a lot of these guys are in that ring for 30 minutes. You know, it's like if you have 6 rolls down
Yeah.
at the elements, how much that
Yeah.
takes out of you. So these guys can do a job if they wanted to. You know, if do you understand that? Does
That
that
makes
sound?
perfect sense. Yeah. Lee, did you
Yeah.
have something you wanted to jump in with, or so you might go on and off?
I was just saying it's like a respect to your skill level, isn't it? It's kind of like it's going to be this score or this outcome, but if you're not good enough or if you're having like a bad turnout, you can turn it around and be like, no, go fuck yourself. I'm taking this one today.
Yeah, yeah. I've never been sacked for doing that, to be honest. But I've heard of some wrestlers have been sacked from a different promoter for doing it, not doing as they were told, sort of thing, because the guy who was wrestling were just idiots. They couldn't do the job.
Well, maybe it's a good time to.
Like in early days at Dow Martins, which was the biggest promoter in the country, um, I did train there a couple of times, but it sort of passed. There weren't so many wrestlers training. They used to go wrestlers from Brighton have been up to London to do training. It's a lot different to what it is now. I mean, and they'd gone to Dow Martin's gym, and the wrestlers there, they're what they call shooters, and the shooters would actually be top amateur wrestlers that do the pro job, and then they would what we used to call screw them until they really hurt. They'd come out crying, a lot of them, and then they would do that for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then they would start teaching them and teaching them, and then that's how they learn how to wrestle properly. You've got to be. It helps to wrestle properly. The wrestlers today, all due respect, there's some good wrestlers out there, but a lot of them are just mimicking what they did in the 50s and 60s and what the WWF or WWE are doing. And it's a shame, really, because they don't know how to wrestle.
Well, what I was going to. Yeah, well, maybe it would be good to get onto your own journey then again. 'Cause I kind of think we veered off a little bit from that. You mentioned, I think we were saying before, you were wrestling in your room with your dad and you got to about 9 or something.
I was about about 9 years old when my dad started, so that would have been about 1968. Oh, I'm making the age now.
um,
1968, 69,
nice.
something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we just kept on, and then the boys' club, as then what is now the youth centre, sort of stopped, and then my dad opened up a few gyms himself in different places. We had one in Whitehawk, we had one in Woodingdean, we had one in in Preston Park, all at separate times because the buildings closed down or I didn't want us anymore, that sort of thing. So my dad started running his own gyms. And the one in Whitehawk, I introduced my mate, Trevor, and another guy there, Steve. I wrestled with him a lot in later years. We used to go there, and because I'd done a lot with my dad, I wasn't a coach, but my dad used to say, like, take them through the paces and do their bits and pieces with them. And we just to practice our pro wrestling in there and taking break falls and doing bits and pieces. And with the pro wrestling, it's like someone gets you in an arm lock, you sort of how to roll out of it and all that sort of thing. So it's all the
That's what I was
actual
going to
sort of
ask. What
stuff
does
we
like a
used to do.
typical training session back then look like?
It's not much difference to a Danny Vlad class, to be honest. We used to do a bit of a warm up, get all warm, and mostly it was doing break falls and that sort of thing. And then who can do the highest break fall? So like you throw yourself, you have a guy on all fours, and you go over the top of him. I'll show you this when we're at the gym one day.
Yeah.
And then I can't do them so bad now. And then you could do the highest one. So we'll have a guy just sort of on, just bending over, and then someone just with their head down, and so you can go over the top without touching them, sort of thing, and land on their back, having a big back, what do they call it, a big fall. So a big bump, as they call it now. And these used to be on solid floors. I mean, the rings of today are just so different. I mean, it's like the floor at Elements. It's nice to land on because it got that little bit of give in it. I've wrestled on concrete floors with just a coconut mat and a canvas over the top of it, and it's like rock solid. So yeah, so I've got what I was. Yeah, so yeah, the club at Whitehall was quite a good one. It's an old boxing club, and we introduced quite a few lads into wrestling through that. And then we used to do the training a couple of days a week, and then at the end of it, we put a show on. I don't know if you know Whitehall at all. It's David's Hall. My dad got a ring. We put a show on in there, and it was all the trainees all done their show in there just to show the parents what they've been doing and everything.
Nice.
So that was my first sort of yeah. I can't remember how old I was then. I was about 12, 13, I think. Yeah, 12, 13. Yeah. One of the guys used to come along. His name was Alec Taylor. He started promoting wrestling, and he wanted to put me on a proper town, what they call a town show, when I was 14.
And what does that mean, a town show?
So that would be, a town show would be like wrestling here tonight. There would be a ring, the wrestling ring, and seats all around, and then people pay to come and watch. So that was my first taste of professional wrestling as a proper professional. I don't think I got paid very much, but about £2.50, I think it was. It might be £1.50.
But how did you find it?
Ah, it's a great night. Great night. It was a strange. It would sound strange to you now. It was me and my dad, and we were. My dad was called Titch. That's his wrestling name, Titch Cooper and Son. Because Jackie Pallow and Son at the time was quite big. So obviously, because I was JJ Junior would be about 70. He'd be about 7. He would have been about 70 now. So he started wrestling a bit before us, and well, he started a long time pro wrestling before me. And so it's Titch Cooper and Son, and there was on one of the shows I think my dad was doing. There was a misprint on one of the posters. My dad used to run shows as well, so like he would promote shows and put guys on and match make and all that sort of thing, sell the tickets and do the raffle, put the ring up, take the ring down, he'd referee, wrestle, he'd do everything. He used to do everything. It was great, my dad, for that. And there was a misprint on the poster. And there was a guy at the time, his name was Gordon Martin, he was wrestling on the mask as the Black Panther. And this is back in the 70s when the Black Panther was a serial killer.
Oh, okay.
And that was just before then. So another guy took the Black Panther over that to stop doing it because his Black Panther was was doing a lot of killings. Anyway, sort of sidetrack there. There was a misprint on the poster. It's Pink Panther. Now, I don't know if you remember Pink Panther. It's the cartoon character.
Yeah, I know
He's
the
a
Pink
great one.
Panther is.
Yeah. So my brother-in-law at the time, he wrestled, Graham. He decided, I'll do the Pink Panther. So he masked up in pink mask and got t-shirts, and then he did it. And then it was decided that and he was a toughie. We would wrestle Pink Panther and Son. So it's my brother-in-law was the Pink Panther, and his son was my mate. Who was Trevor. He masked up and did all that. So it was a great night. And my dad's mum, my nan, she come to watch, and she used to love the wrestling. She used to get up there and scream at the tellies, Mick McManus and Jackie Pallow, "Hey, dirty old man," that sort of thing. "Don't do that. They're cheating." Well, she had a fit when she come along. She was crying, "Get him out of there!" Because I was getting beaten up. "Get him out of there! Get him out of there!" She was going mad. My mum had to hold her back because my dad was there. It was just, and I had to go and talk to her afterwards. "I'm all right, Nan. I'm all right, really. I'm fine. Don't worry about it." So I've got black eye and missing a load of hair and all that. So it was great night. And being 14, it was like sort of the kids at school were saying, "What are you doing tonight?" "Oh, I'm wrestling at St Barnabas Hall tonight." "Wrestling?" Yeah, professional wrestling. It was great night. That was highlight of my. I can't remember much about the match, but it was just
Is that because of the
great.
time ago, or did you take some damage? Is that because of how
Sorry?
long ago it was, or did you take some damage and you can't remember?
It was in
Yeah,
1974. Okay, so that's
yeah, it's
quite a
fair.
long time ago. And to be honest, I mean, there's very few wrestling matches. There's lots of wrestling matches I can remember wrestling people. I remember the first time I wrestled Steve Gray and bits of that. I can't remember the whole match, but like, I can remember bits in that. The first time I wrestled my mate Mal, Howard Lee Bronson came to one of my dad's gyms one day. I was standing in awe of this television star wrestling was coming to my dad's gym. So it's just he was, and that Howard's taught me a lot of catch stuff.
I
So
do have to ask because me and
yeah.
Robbie are a bit obsessed with it on the jiu-jitsu side. But you're saying like about all like the tumbling and all that. What was injuries like with it? Like how often did you get injured and how did you cope with it?
To be honest, I never got many injuries at pro wrestling. I've probably sprained my wrist a couple of times, sprained my ankles a couple of times. It's usually because I've done some stupid flip or jumped off a top rope or something like that and dived onto someone or dived across someone. Not many injuries. I've had a few clouts from people because I think I've been a bit of an idiot sometimes, but nothing I wouldn't really sort of write home about. Nothing I can't say, "Oh yeah, he did that because I did that." It's nothing like that. I've had a few and clumsy wrestlers give you good hard sometimes. But it's no, I had more injuries playing football than I did actually wrestling. That's what I got most. I broke my leg playing football in '93, but like it's just yeah, most injuries I've had playing football.
It's kind of surprising, actually, considering the stunts you were doing onto hardwood and concrete flooring, that you didn't get more fucked up.
It's because we learn how to
Yeah.
fall. It's learned. A lot of people when they fall, they go to put their hands down, like that, and you can't do that. You fall forwards. Don't put your hands down in front of you because you are going to hurt yourself. It's going to jar. You're going to bend your
I
wrists
think in my
back.
third MMA
When
class, I dislocated my shoulder because I fell like that. So
yeah, it's because yeah, it's go to the fundamental classes. They teach you how to fall. You roll into a fall. I've jumped, used to dive off. Well, I still done it. I haven't done it. When was the last time I did it? I can't remember now. That 6 months ago, I had a wrestling show, and I died off the top rope. I mean, it's a lot easier in the rings there, but a lot of the old rings used to be rock solid. And you had to land properly, otherwise you'd end up hurting yourself. And it's you look at stuntmen. Carlos asked me, "How do you fall down?" I was showing him some of the falls, how to fall down, how to fall down without hurting yourself. He said, "I've asked people." He said, "People have asked me to do falls without padding on and fall down the stairs and things like that." I said, "It's just the way you do it." I mean, another important thing is getting rid of the air out your lungs. So in a lot of wrestling, you hear a lot of wrestlers shout when there's nothing going on. Now, when a guy gets thrown, you launch yourself off, and before you hit the ground, you give out a big shout, "Ah!" And it gets all the air out your lungs, and it stops you winding yourself if you land badly. And it's little things like that you have to sort of pick up over the years.
You're making me feel soft now, because I complain when I fall onto like big heavy mats now. So you're making me feel soft.
Well, they train on crash mats. A lot of the guys, they do all these big falls. I mean, it's the same as gymnastics, and they train on trampolines to get the height to do the spins. And then they have when they're training to do big spins, or when they're doing high stuff, they have the big pools, pits of foam, don't they, and that sort of thing. I mean, a lot of wrestling schools have crash mats now, so they can practice those big moves. But unless you fall properly off of those, you are going to end up hurting yourself. Yeah, I've had, not many injuries. I've had sprained wrist, elbow, knocked an elbow or something, but like something you can sort of carry on with.
So you're 14, doing all these wrestling shows with your dad at the time. Where did it progress from there?
Unfortunately, my progression was rather slow. As I said earlier, going to Dale Martin's, they like really, really hurt you. It'd be like rolling with Dom on full swing every time you went there. So they'd really, really hurt you and make sure they'd hurt you, because it was in the early days. It was a very closed shop. You either knew someone in the wrestling fraternity, big wrestling in Dale Martin's, or you were a good amateur progressing on to professional. So I only really wrestled for my dad. I had a couple of other people who asked me to wrestle for him, but we never really tried. We tried to break into Dale Martin's, but we never quite made it. Me and my dad, we went up there a couple of times, and the guys, we see guys in there, just turned up there, done a bit of wrestling, then there was working for Dale Martin's, as such. They called it work. And then I could never sort of break in. And then there was a Big Daddy show, Big Daddy Giant Haystack show in Brighton at the Dome. This would have been about 1979, 1980. And it was the real big rise of Big Daddy. And I've been training at Dale Martin's. There's a guy called Peter Zakash, great Hungarian wrestler. I could tell you a funny story about him in a minute,
sure,
if you want. He saw us there. We let us in the back door, and we went in. We was watching the wrestling, and then he come up to me. He said, "How long will it take to get your wrestling stuff?" I said, "Well, actually, it's in the car. It'll take me a couple of minutes to get it, because we always go to a wrestling show. If you went to any pro wrestler, if they went to a wrestling show to watch or see somebody, they always had their gear in the bag, because to the nature of the sport, there's always injuries."
Yep.
So we were sitting there. He said, "Oh, all right, go and get your stuff and then come down just after half time." So I went down there, got my stuff, went down into dressing rooms, And Big Daddy was there. Giant Haystacks was there. There's a couple of other wrestlers. Another guy, Titch White, and I forgot the guy's name now. It'll come to me in a minute. Billy Trontus was the wrestler. So I got interviewed. I got interviewed as you do a job by Big Daddy. He said, "Who you wrestled for? What have you done? Blah blah blah." I said, "Well, I've only wrestled locally for my dad." "Who's your dad?" And he didn't know my dad. And he asked me if I worked for Jackie Pallo. Well, Jackie Pallo at the time had done his spoiling book a couple of years before, so he was ostracised from the wrestling business. Although he did promote himself, and he was quite a good promoter. I said, "No, I haven't worked for Jackie Pallo." And he said, "Oh, okay." I said, "Right. After the next bout, come down." So I went back up downstairs. My dad was all excited. My dad was more excited than me. And he's saying, just do as you're told. Just be nice and loose. Just do this. Just do that. Just relax and blah blah. And so yeah, all right, Dad, all right. And he was all excited. And then I had my bag. I went back down to Drake change rooms, and I think it was after Big Daddy's been on. It might be before Big Daddy's been on. And he said to me, "Oh, sorry, lad, it's not on." And no, what's the matter? No, it's not on. And then Giant Haystacks piped up, "Give the lad a chance." But unfortunately, I didn't get my chance. And I think it would have been different because if I'd have wrestled then, I think it would have been different for my whole career. It sort of knocked me back a little bit. I was about 20 at the time, 21, and it sort of knocked me back a little bit. Yeah, so that was one of the my biggest disappointments in wrestling. That if I'd have wrestled that night, I think I would have been able to. I would have been not a big star, but probably got somewhere different, better. You know what I mean? Yeah, it was about 1980, I think. I was about 21.
Yeah, man, it's a bit of a somber note.
Yeah, so but there's other promoters, other bigger promoters. I wrestled for what is now All Star Promotions from Merseyside, or Merseyside Promotions. I got in with them, and then a guy called Scott Conway. Oh, that was before that. Me and my dad, we did a couple of shows for the Argus Christmas Appeal, and we put on a couple of big shows there. And then on the third one, a guy named John Fremantle, he was the sports editor, asked me if he could take it over and do it himself. And this is the second time I met Big Daddy. He said, "We're going to put a show on at Hometown Hall with Big Daddy, and we put you on it as well." So I said, "Well, okay then." I don't think I got paid for it because it was a charity show, but there was about 1,300 people. That was up to then. That's probably the biggest crowd I'd wrestled in front of, and a lot of it's a home crowd. And it's just surprising of how many people actually knew me. It was amazing. That's one of my experiences. As Big Daddy show, I don't think he remembered me, but got on quite well with him in the end after that. But
yeah, a little break at least. Yeah,
that was in 1987.
So it's a few years on at that point, yeah.
So I've done a lot of wrestling in between, but not as much as I'd like to have done. I mean, some of the pro wrestlers working 7 nights a week, sometimes doing 2 shows a night.
So it's full on like the theatre kind of level performance. Like you hear about theatre people doing.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
That's kind of the stories that you hear, like the promotions. Like in the US, I've heard the stories of them kind of 2 shows, pack up onto the next sitter, 2 shows, pack up onto the next sitter.
Yeah, but Mick McManus, he was running joint promotions for a little while, and he was obviously their biggest star. Have you heard of him, Mick McManus? Yeah, he was one of the biggest stars there. He was on something like £16 a night, unless you went to Scotland, you got more. But he was on £16 a night, and this is in the 60s and 70s. when the average wage was £16 a week.
Oh right, he was
So
minted then.
he made it. He was making loads and loads and loads of money at it. Well, fair play to him. I mean, he did a good job, and he could look after himself as well. He was a man that people love to hate.
When you were saying about like
So,
the late 80s and kind of 90s, was the dream of wrestlers coming up then to kind of go over to America? Was this at the point where it was kind of go to America to be bigger? Was that where it kicked off, or how did you look at the American approach to wrestling? Was it kind of frowned upon?
no, because some of my acquaintances from wrestling, William Regal, wrestled on the same bill as him. I've been in the same ring as him in a Rumble. Do you remember Earthquake? Yeah, John. He's dead now. John, I forgot his surname. But he was a big star in the 80s, the 90s. Greg Valentine. He came to Worthing once for John Fremantle. British Bulldog, obviously. I never met Dynamite Kid, but like he was been a tough old cookie to beat. He was although Davey Boy and Dynamite Kid were like flamboyant as they were, they could do a job. They could look after themselves as well. There's no mucking about with them. So I've been on the same shows as those. Been the same ring as Earthquake. There's quite a few really. I was at Tunbridge Wales when William Regal, he was Steve Regal over here. He just got into WWE then. And he was supposed to be on the bill, but he couldn't do it because he was contracted with WWF. But he still turned up. He's sort of promoter and that. So anyway, John Fremantle done this wrestling spectacular at Hose Town Hall, and he'd done a couple more. And then there's a promoter in Southampton named Scott Conway. He offered me loads of work, and I had loads of work with him, and that's how it's been since how it was in the late 80s, early 90s until I broke my leg in 93.
Football, not wrestling.
Football, yeah. I had everything. I mean, I wasn't I've never been a rich wrestler. I've never been paid loads. I've always been like the wrestler at the foot of the bill, sort of thing, promoting the rest of the other stuff and doing things like that. So I've never been a star. I wouldn't say that, but like I was wrestling 3 or 4 times a week, going all up and down the country. I was lucky enough I had my taxi back then. I had 2 drives on my taxi, so I didn't have to worry about that. And yeah, I was doing a great time wrestling all up and down the country, doing holiday camps. That was an experience. Holiday camps, yeah, wrestling 3 or 4 times a day, putting the ring up, taking it down. Onto the next one, doing a week's tour. Yeah, so that was an experience as well. That's with Scott.
And what was the story you were going to tell about? Sorry, was it a Hungarian chap?
Hungarians, yeah. Peter Zakash and another great wrestler, and his brother Tibor, was the older brother, came to this country just after the war, I think. They're Hungarians, and they were Hungarian amateur champions. And they went along to watch the wrestling, and they said, "Well, we could do this shit," and that's how they got into it. And Tibor was probably one of Dale Martin's biggest stars in the times in the 70s. He said, "Oh yeah, we can do this shit," and of course they could, and they've become big stars for it, both of them.
Yeah.
And then Peter, he showed us around the gym, and he tried to get me jobs for Dale Martins, but there was nothing there for me because my dad was a little bit too old then. He could still do it, but he was like me, a little bit too old. So he couldn't sort of matchmake us up. Or if I'd have had a partner, we probably would have got a bit of wrestling in there. Because once you're in with Dale Martins, that's it. You just progress. They'd find you more opponents, and you'd be going all over the place. It didn't quite work out. But he's the one that got me into the Dome, and I forgot what I was going. Oh yeah, that was it. There's a guy turned up, Keith Hayward, on Sunday when my dad was there, and he was an ex-Commonwealth champion. I don't know whether it was just recently, but he decided that he was going to come over, and then Peter got in the ring and he got my dad in, and he was saying, like, we do it slightly different here, and blah blah blah, and sort of things. They do this and that. And he pulled my dad to pieces. My dad came out black and blue. Poor fellow he was. He must have been about 50. My dad at the time must have been, yeah. And a week or so later, he was wrestling on the bill at the Dome. So it was just because he was a good wrestler, and he is a very good wrestler. He was a very good wrestler. He got the work that way. I was just like I was skinny like a beanpole. I should find you a photograph of me when I was actually wrestling. I was skinny like a beanpole. I was 8 stone wet, sort of thing. So I was a bag of bones. So I didn't look a wrestler, and I think that's probably why I didn't progress at an early age. That sort of the 18, 19-year-old. That's well, I should have been going into it. I was just like a beanpole.
Because that was part of the persona, wasn't it? It was those the big guys. The guy you mentioned earlier, I looked at the picture of him. I just googled him. He's like got the old style dumbbell and he's lifting that. It's kind of that's what really.
Which one was that?
Azizi something. Yeah.
Oh, Tibor.
Yeah.
Tibor Zakash. Yeah.
I had to Google him, and he's got the big dumbbell, and it's kind of like it's what you expect to see, isn't it?
Yeah, it was either a big fat round wrestler, big daddy type wrestler, or a fairly muscly wrestler. And I mean, looking back I look back. Mick McManus was always sort of roundish. He was short and round. He was never looked muscly. But when you see some of their old photographs, I mean, I was looking at him wrestling when he was like 50 on the telly, sort of thing. And when you look at some of their when they were younger, you see them now and again, they had quite a physique on them, and they were quite muscly where they'd done the wrestling. So it is other wrestlers you can sort of look at that. So you can look at Les Kellett as working as a wrestler in his later life. He didn't have much of a body. He was an old man. I mean, but if you speak to any wrestler about him, he was one of the toughest of them all. Yeah, he looks like a nice softy comedian in the ring.
Oh.
So many different characters, and it's just. I only met Les once, and he was he was just sitting in the corner change room, cloth cap on, overcoat on, just sitting there waiting for him to go on his wrestling. When he'd done his wrestling, went back and sat down again. It was just well, I don't know if he's a nice man because I got to talk to him.
Well, on the subject of characters, I mean, did you build up a persona of your own to go along with the wrestling in general?
Yeah, hang on a minute. Bloody shit. I've got an iCloud thing come up now. No, not really. Not a persona. So I've always been really just a clean-cut professional wrestler, and I've never really sort of gone any further than that. I haven't really thought about. Oh, go away! Sorry. I can still see you, Rob. Lee, you've been blanked out. Sorry. Yeah, so I've always been just a clean-cut professional wrestler as such, and people like seeing me as that. Yes, a lot of so many different types of wrestlers. You get the wrestler who has the image that he put and his persona out there, and he would just do that in the ring. When he gets out of the ring, totally different person. You get other ones, other ones that actually live and dream the whole persona. They live, eat, and breathe that persona. They are that person. It's just
I see, yeah.
strange.
So as like a guy who
How
liked WWE, and you've got
how
like the Undertaker who never did an
wrestling is.
interview, and like he stayed in character forever. And then when he retired, he did loads of interviews, and that's quite cool.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but like, yeah, probably different
Mm.
person. It's just, yeah, if in front of camera, when like I've only wrestled on telly once, but like I could imagine how it would be like in front of the camera. You build this persona, so you've got to do that persona. They are entertainers in that respect. It's different for like um, someone like Sean Connery as such. He he played lots of different people, so he had different characters he played. But with wrestlers, they just mostly do just one character, and they see that in front of the camera. So when people see you in the street, they just presume you're still that character. It's very strange. I've had people walk up to me in the street and say, "Hello, Barry. How are you? How you doing?" And I haven't got a clue who they are. That's just one of the strangest things. And you think, "Oh, where do they know me from?"
Well,
I've wrestled under different names in different places. I was on the Isle of Wight. Just trying to think, when was that? That would have been about uh, 84, 85, something like that. I was wrestling on the Isle of Wight, and the promoter had a poster up, and it had lots of different names on it. And he said, "Oh, you're I can't remember her name now. You're John Smith tonight." Oh, okay. He introduced me as John Smith. Afterwards, someone walked up and says, "You're Barry, aren't you? You're Barry from Brighton." Yeah. We live in Brighton. We've seen you wrestle in Brighton before. Why do they call you John Smith? So I said, "Oh, it's just a printing error." So they don't like to. The promoters don't like to deceive the people by putting loads of names on there, and so they're not appearing, sort of thing. So they just make the names fit. That's happened to me a few times, but it's not it's just part of the wrestling flamboyancy promotion sort of thing.
well, on that subject of the flamboyancy and the promotion stuff, I just wanted to ask sort of about, because obviously the UK scene has not been nearly as prolific as like the American pro wrestling scene. There's obviously a huge American pro wrestling scene, and I don't know. Maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like pro wrestling in the UK seemed huge when you were talking about it in like the 60s and the 70s. Nowadays, not so much. I mean, do you have any thoughts on why maybe it's grown more in the US than over here?
Probably because of
Mm-hmm.
television, to be honest. Television and the exposure it gets from the television. Um, it finished, I think it was about 88 on British television. Greg Dyker took over, didn't like wrestling. And it's simple as he didn't like wrestling, so he pulled the plug on it. And Greg Dyke was head of ITV at the time, and that was that. And that was the end of it. It took it picked up in
Yeah.
the halls, and so like you go into the halls, it picked up in the halls just after that, but then slowly dwindled away because people sort of lost interest because they're not seeing household names again. It's the draw, and those that were the household names, obviously getting older and retiring. McManus had already retired by then, but there was others like Brian Maxine, Bobby Barnes,
Uh-huh.
great wrestlers. Um, Getting old, people were going to see them, but obviously they're getting older and they're not as good as they used to be. And then it was getting that new generation of people involved in it. They just weren't. I'll get rid of this.
Well, then maybe a better question to ask to sort of start rounding it up, if it's not too early to do that. What do we? You obviously love the sport, and obviously, and clearly, if it's this one guy who's come in from ITV and ruined it in the UK or ruined the scene of it, do you ever see it making a comeback? And what would you hope to happen for pro wrestling in the future in the UK?
There's quite a bit of pro wrestling on the television at the moment. There's one on ITV2 runs once a week. I've forgotten the Dynamite Wrestling, I think it's called. I have watched it a couple of times. Not just sort of usually I'm in bed and I'll have a look up and see a little bit of it. I've seen a couple of guys who I've wrestled on there before and sort of thing. Oh yeah, I've seen how they're getting on. I just don't think it's got the following as it used to. It's just it was a long time off for television and trying to get it back onto prime television spot. 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon was you had to be home by 4 o'clock. And one of the instigators of getting it off the television at 4 o'clock was the owner of Tesco's, because all these shops were empty at 4 o'clock and he wasn't selling any food at 4 o'clock. So he wanted it off. I don't know if it was him personally, but like there's lots of other people as well. But like he wanted it off the television at 4 o'clock because nobody was going in the shops. No one was doing any shopping. And there wasn't 24-hour stores in either. Back then in the 80s, all the supermarkets were closed on Sundays. And Saturday was the day that everybody did their shopping.
Yeah, so. Funny influences from around.
Yeah.
Lee, do we need to be wrapping this one up for you at the moment, or?
Yeah, so that's kind of a good spot for me.
No worries. Well, Barry, look, we could actually crack on and go through a few more stories. I mean, Lee could always log off at this point if you've got a dash. Barry, did you have any more key stories you wanted to go through? Any sort of funny tales and stuff like that you
funny tales?
Yeah, if there was anything like that.
Well, I don't know sort of how funny you want them.
Well, you be the judge of that. If it's a story you'd want to tell, you tell us. Lee, if you got to jump off now, then go for it. I think it should be all right.
Trying to think of a funny story. I don't know. Really don't know. It's a wrestling story, but not really a wrestling story. I was wrestling in Midhurst, a place called the Grange, and I'd wrestled there before, and it's sort of been. Well, when I wrestled there before, it's been built, and they built this big hall onto it. It was like it was a partly leisure centre, but it was like a community hall, church hall to start with, that sort of thing, community centre, which they built on as a leisure centre. They built a big hall onto it, and I've wrestled a couple of times. It was in building state. Well, I think they'd finished it, and I wrestled there for, I can't remember who it was for. I think it was for John Fremantle, and a couple of pals were there. And I'd been in dummy wrestling, came out into the change rooms, and I saw the janitor there. I said, "Is there any showers we can use here?" Because we were just changing in a room. And he went, "Oh yeah, over there." And there was like public showers. Where it was like a leisure centre, and the toilets were just there, so people could walk to us. I said, "I've got more bit private than that." And he said, "Oh yeah, use the sauna room." So I went, "Oh okay." So I've gone in there. I thought, "Oh, sauna, I'll have a quick sauna while I'm here." So I had a quick shower, jumped in the sauna, come out, showered off again, and had a great big jacuzzi. So well, that's nice. So I've walked up the jacuzzi, and there's a man and a woman in the jacuzzi. So I said, "Do you mind if I join you?" They said, No, of course. So I put my towel down, got in the jacuzzi, he was chatting away, "What you been doing?" "I've just been wrestling." "Oh, right, great, blah, 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 blah." And he was chatting away about it. And the fella looked at the girl, and the girl looked at the fella, and they sort of nodded like that, and they said, we going then? And they went, yeah, yeah. So they decided they got out and they had swimming costumes on. I'd got in and I didn't have a swimming costume. It was just, and I sort of ducked my head down. That was all right. Didn't say it.
Didn't
That was
care,
fine.
apparently.
And I got my towel, got myself. This after I left, got my towel, got myself dried off. Went back to the changing room, got myself dressed. Met my dad because my dad drove down there, sort of thing. And we said, "We'll go up and have a drink in the bar." And I walked into the bar, and as I walked into the bar, the first table in the door was the girl and the fella just sitting there. It was just like, oh god. And she went, "Didn't recognise you with your clothes on." So that was all right. That's fine, but like it was just a bit sort of slight
That's all right.
embarrassment.
Couple of other things
Yeah.
I'm wondering about. I mean, obviously you're from Brighton. You've been from Brighton since forever, so there
Yeah.
is obviously some wrestling scene in Brighton. It sounds like there's been a lot of wrestling in Brighton. Has it historically been like a wrestling hub, or is that just how much was going on at the time?
Well, the wrestling started in Brighton. I mean, there's probably lots of wrestling. There was lots of wrestling promoters throughout the country. Small promoters like my dad used to do all over the country. But the main who had the television rights was Joint Promotions, which was Dale Martin's and a few North and Western Wrighton in the north, and a couple of others. So they were joint promotions. So they kept it as a closed shop. You only have if you wrestled for joint promotions, you didn't wrestle for anybody else. That was one of their rules. There was a few that sort of wrestled for the smaller promoters just because they weren't quite big stars. But once they got to be the big stars promoted, they had to do as they're told. But the wrestling at the Brighton Boys Club was started off by a couple of 2 or 3 guys that wanted to do wrestling. A guy named Georgie Ruckman and Billy Ruckman. And a guy to ask about it, if you really want to ask about it, is Tony Van Silver. Have you not met him?
I don't know who Tony Van Silver is.
No. He started off in Brighton wrestling. Great amateur. He goes to Elements. Yep. He hasn't been for a while because he had cancerous sarcophagus and he hasn't been for a while. But if he's there when I'm there, we just usually stick together because he's a little bit older than me. But great wrestler, stuntman. So there's the Ruckmans and him, Tony, and his ring name was Joronsky. So he was great. He was a good wrestler. And they started this club up, and one of them knew. One of them's related to Johnny Peters, who used to promote Dale Martin's wrestlers in the Brighton area, King Alfred, Metropole, a couple of other places. I think they used to do the Corn Exchange as well, and the Dome. So he was part of that, and George and Billy were sort of related. Then they introduced a few more wrestlers to it, a few more guys. So they all started up their own club. There's supposed to be about 30 or 40 of them at one point who used to train there. I could have got you a photo. I'll try and dig a photograph out for you to show you next time I see you. And so they got Bert Azarati involved, and he was teaching them how to do the wrestling, etc., etc. So they used to do a show once a month at the Boys Club, and they did other places as well. Another funny story. My dad used to have a little like a 3,500 weight van, an Austin van, which was not quite a lorry, but bigger than a van. About the size of what would be a Mercedes Sprinter now, but it was a flat back, bigger than a Transit, a little bit bigger than a Transit, but not quite a lorry. And he used to drive that for the company he used to work for, doing painting and decorating. and they asked him if they could use that to transport the ring to Gatwick. And they were doing a show in a hangar at Gatwick Airport. This was probably I was about 12, so it would have been about 72, 73 maybe, or 71, 72. So I mean, and the ring they had used to weigh a ton. Well, more than a ton. It was really, really heavy. So they loaded the ring up onto the van. 3 of the guys got on the back of the van, open truck van, and was laying under the ring. Bert Azarati got into the cab, and the MC at the time, Don, he said, "Oh, you to my dad, your boy can sit on the back. I'll sit in the front." And he went, "No, no, no. My boy sits by the side of me." I went, "Oh, okay." So he had to get on the back, and probably it would have been safer on the back because it only had a bit of 4x2 was holding the whole weight of this ring on that. So if it collapsed, it would kill us all. It would kill us all instantly. It was so heavy. And yeah, for the Gatwick. That was a great night. I got up into I sat in the cockpit of an airplane with
Nice.
one of the pilots. It was in a hangar. The rest was in a hangar. Yeah, so great experience. I was about 12 years
Awesome.
old then, yeah.
And I guess the other bit I was interested to hear about. Do you have any opinions on the way that sort of pro wrestling has? I'm just been thinking about how pro wrestling has kind of influenced like MMA promotion in the way that people sort of behave outside of the ring. Do people used to talk in the same sort of ways that they do now? You know, like people sort of making these ridiculous threats and being flamboyant. You know, Colby Colvington obviously is a big MMA guy at the moment who has clearly got some pro wrestling influence, as has Conor McGregor. Did people sort of talk like that outside of the ring back when you were really into it, back in the 70s and the 80s? And
Yeah, but it was because it's with WWE now. It's. I mean, they're great guys. I mean, I wouldn't like to mess about too much with them because they do a job, and it's the job they do. Um, takes some doing to do that job, to be a wrestler, and some of the things they do and the high risk stuff they take. I mean, there's lots of guys lost their lives and doing it, but a lot of it is like a soap opera now. They tell the whole story, so the threats on camera are probably scripted in
yes, of
that
course.
respect. Yeah, so when it mixes over to mixed martial arts, MMA and UFC and all that sort of thing, they're probably not
No.
scripted, but look at some of the boxing interviews where they slag each other off. You to really hurt someone and to really want to win something, you've got to really hate that person, and you've got to get it. That's one of the things you've got to get into your if you are fighting is not to make friends with who you're fighting
Yep.
with, because you make friends with them, you're not going to hurt them when you really need to, and that's where that scripting from the WWE comes from. It's telling people a story of what's going on. The WWE build up to their WrestleMania, and that's their pinnacle of their
Mm-hmm.
season as such. EastEnders build up to their Christmas show, which is a pinnacle of their season. Well, it's not a season of them as such, but they build up to a
Yes.
climax, don't they? And once they've reached that climax, it drops down again. They might have another one just starting just before, and that's what WWE do. And that's how they attract people to watch it, because it tells a story. The British wrestlers, although they would have what not I can't explain it, but like they would have other wrestlers at different shows. So, like, so for example, my dad was doing a wrestling show, and he'd already planned next month's show, which would be Wrestler A against Wrestler B. The Wrestler A would be on the show that night, and Wrestler B would be in the crowd, and they'll have a little bit of a word with each other. No, you're not that good. I could beat you with my hands tied behind my back, and that sort of thing. And then that would attract people to come on. So it was done, obviously, without the television. It wasn't so impactful.
But it was done.
It would sell tickets. Oh, I've got to come and see that. I've got to come and see that.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Or they'd have the same two wrestlers on the same bill. Or there would be a dodgy decision for a win, and they'd be going, "Oh, I want a rematch." And of course, the crowd are going, "Yeah, you deserve one. Get the promoter up here, get a rematch." And then they'd renege a rematch, and hopefully that would sell them a few more tickets for that. I mean, it's the same. Polaris probably is similar. I'm not saying it isn't, but like they put the top grapplers on there because they want to attract people. I don't know. Do you have to pay per view for Polaris?
There's options. I think that is one option.
Yeah. Or can you pay to go and watch?
You can pay to go and watch it for sure. I think you can do pay per view or
live. So it's no good. It'd be no good putting me on there against Dom because they're not going to like it. They're going to think, "Well, what a mismatch! What a load of rubbish!" Because it would be a mismatch as such. So I'm just saying, not me and Dom personally, but like you've got to put him up against someone. Someone
knows what they're doing.
For real, Dom's going to have his followers, and whoever his opponent's going to have followers. So they're both going to want to see their man win.
Yeah.
And then if it's not a dodgy decision, but like something that if Dom thinks he should have won, he's going to want a rematch at some point.
Of course,
I would have thought. So it's all with all sports. Football's the same. Football's the same. You get the followings. They get the manager to talk after the game or before the game, and they're building it up. So it's all entertainment.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please consider subscribing to the podcast and checking us out on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram under the name Combat Thoughts. We'll see you next time.